So, so yeah, I guess we can just do kind of like just hands, and we can just make sure everyone's kind of voices are heard as much as possible in this space. So if you want to raise your hand, if you want to start either responding things Mark and Cindy said, or new ideas to throw out there.
I'm starting a campaign that kind of connects all this with some other people. It's called Occupy Occupation. We're setting up a website. We're going to have resume drives to politicians and business leaders to tell people to get a job. I was wondering if I can hand out the flyers.
Yeah. All right, hands for this discussion.
Something that I'd really like to hear folks talk about, I think both of our speakers kind of touched on the problem of our General Assemblies, or people coming from all different sides agreeing that General Assemblies are a problem, and that we've sort of come to a point where we've fetishized process enough that it's not actually facilitating us being effective. It's bogging us down in hand raising and just like a complete kind of meltdown. So I'd really like to hear suggestions from folks about what can be done differently with the GA, or if there's just something to replace the GA entirely.
Your responses to that?
Spokes council.
Well, I do know there's a process group that meets, and maybe come up with a bunch of different things. My fear is that they're just going to they're trying, and I read all in the notes, so they're kind of reinventing the wheel with the wheel. I know that sounds bad, but it's kind of like how Cindy was talking about. We invented a protest and called it a movement, but we didn't strategize, and it just kind of went in all different kinds of ways and stuff. And I think that's kind of from what I'm seeing in the process notes. And I know they meet and they're debating when now. They're going to meet again, because I asked them maybe make sure I can actually attend one of these, because I don't know. I think they're romanticizing spokes models and not having the experience of it, and they're romanticizing what Occupy Wall Street's doing. And so there is a group, and I think that if people wanted to try to maybe weave in, I think that would probably be the best place to start. Because again, if we're going to be inclusive and all that, we don't want to meet separate from folks that are already trying to come up with some solutions. And I know that they're looking at possibly meeting again at 11 on Saturday at the Friends. And it's called the Process Working Group. And it comes out of the Messaging Working Group. Which to me, there's just too many working groups. And I'm not in any official working group anymore because I don't really get what working group to be in. And I'm used to affinity groups. And so my question to them is, what are you going to do with individuals who are used to affinity groups and not working groups, and how do they have a spokes? And their answer was, well, they would be the Occupy spoke. And I said, but I don't want to occupy a spoke with a bunch of people I don't philosophically agree with. So I know there is somebody, folks. Jenna, I don't know who she is, but that's one of the names. Oh, you Jenna? Excellent. So that's one of the names. I'm Kathy.
I would love to respond.
Yes. So
We had another hand up here.
Oh, I was going to say, we actually had C.T. Butler come in a few weeks ago, who wrote the book on conflict and consensus, and has a new book coming out, The Consensus of a Group for 100,000 or More. Now, when he was here, our camp was in that beautiful transition of the people who had been here from the beginning to people coming in and looking for problems. So not too many people were interested in hearing him, but if it's possible, we could probably get him back out here, because he did love just being here and watching our assemblies, but he saw a lot of broken parts of our system. I don't know if there's anything anybody's interested in, but the man has been living on a commune with his partner Ren for 15 years that runs completely off of consensus without a General Assembly.
I would love to speak to what Kathy just said. I'm pretty sure we have set down that 11 a.m. meeting at the Friends Center, and that's going to be on Saturday. We've had 3 or 4 meetings so far, and I wouldn't say that we're interested at all at romanticizing the process, but it's true that some have experience and some don't with it. So what we are concerned with is making a space where people can get informed about that process and ask questions about it and review the materials that have already been written and discussed in other occupied groups. What we are aware of is that it is working better in some than others. The issue of an active encampment has come up multiple times, and obviously you need to start thinking critically about a process when the conditions change. So that's what we're asking in those meetings, and also hopefully they're not the only meetings. Hopefully working groups will start their own discussions and find their own consensus or get new ideas that we can bring to a process that's more constructive and that opens the GA to make that a more informative space also. That's all I'm saying.
More hands?
I guess my question about continuing GAs would be, because and I think, Cindy, you may have brought this up, but since we don't have an encampment at the moment, and because GA, I can't imagine, would be bogged down by the logistical questions, there's a way in which I think it could open up into being something more informative and a place where people go to report back on work that they're doing outside of the banner of the General Assembly. And maybe perhaps to get word out to get other people on board, and it would be something I found that, like, in this city, when a lot of different people are engaged in a lot of different social projects and radical projects, it's hard to plug into those if you don't know specific people, or there's not a place to go to really get access to that or feel part of that process. And I'm wondering if it could be the GA could become something that's more where people go to plug in to different projects and where people kind of, inform people about things that they're doing already.
I have a few things to say. One about the conversation about the GA, and one just about 2 points that both of you raised that are a little bit contradictory.
I'm not sure. Can people in the back hear? Sorry.
Okay. Sorry. Hi. I have 2 points to raise. One about the GA and one about 2 points that they brought up. The first thing is that I just have a general question about the fact that our GAs so far, being totally public, have had press and have had police. I'm pretty sure police at every single GA. So if we're talking about moving forward and doing things that are unexpected, the GA seems like a complicated place to discuss those things. The other thing, just to shift the conversation a little bit, we can come back to the GA if people want to keep talking about that, but I was curious about the fact that that Mark brought up the need to reach a more broad popular base, a more diverse group of people, and only with that popular support can we do anything truly radical. And then Cindy talked about how what we really need are to put out certain goals, those goals being social transformation beyond states and beyond capitalism as two of the ones that that I think you were saying people are ready to hear. I'm not sure.
I guess I was saying, I think implicitly that's sort of what everyone's saying, and they don't even came into it without the language for that.
Right.
And I don't think it's actually that scary an idea, and I think maybe it's we're used to saying it in a way that makes it, but I feel like, I guess I was trying to argue sort of the same as Mark, but that the reason this movement started that's unique is because there's the shared sense of something that's causing this, and some of us have like a long time been thinking about that. And how do we bridge that gap for people to move increasingly to get that? Which I actually saw on the streets the other night when a lot of people were I ran into a few of you earlier today, people were marking how a lot more people suddenly got the blinders come off, like, oh, the police are not our friends. All you need is 5 minutes when a cop's hitting someone with a baton to get that. And sadly, it takes some of that. So I guess I wasn't arguing that we should suddenly just be like, oh, I'm a fucking anti-capitalist, fuck you, and get rid of everyone else. I was actually arguing the problematic of making explicit what's been implicit, and I didn't get to strategies of how we could do that, but I think that's the next question. If that's what we want to do, then how would we do it?
I guess that's what I was trying to ask. It's like, okay, so let's talk about some of those strategies.
Did you want to open up responses to the GA point first, and then we can like return to like both of those points?
Sorry to complicate it.
That's okay. Did anyone have responses to the point about the General Assemblies?
I think this is sort of a direct response to the thing about the police. I think
opening things up more to be more inclusive while at the same time emphasizing security culture is really important, and maybe keeping discussions about specific actions to affinity groups. So kind of separating the two, I think, would be really, for me, an important direction to go in.
I have a question on that. How do you recognize which affinity groups would have access to information about which actions? It seems complicated.
Oh, I mean, I just like
that's for, I guess for discussion.
I guess to
time,
clarify,
unless maybe there's an answer.
yeah, to clarify what I was saying would just be individual groups of people who trusted each other, taking it upon themselves to maybe do specific actions that were in line with the movement as a whole, while, you know, larger strategizing meetings that were, you know, structured in a way to be really inclusive would, you know, have emphasis on not speaking about specific things that you didn't want, you know, whoever to hear.
So I hand in the back, and then maybe we can bring it back to Mark and Cindy if there's one that you made earlier.
Okay. Well, I'm not really sure how to frame this, but I kind of wanted to pick up on what the gentleman with the glasses and the beard was saying about turning the GA more into kind of like a report back on what working groups are doing, rather than, I feel like part of the problem of what it's become is that it's become another form of control, with certain people wanting to, you know, be holding the purse strings for certain groups, and other people wanting them to, but then it's like, what about the rest of us who don't want people telling us what to do? And so we all have to kind of, I guess, examine that question of, you know, do we want to have everything voted on?
And then after.
I just
do you want to stand up? So do
yeah. I just kind of wanted to respond to some of the things about, or just kind of the general discussion about reevaluating the GA now and what that means. And I think that, I guess, I've been thinking a lot about like representation, and it's kind of interesting to notice what votes we consensus on as a GA and what votes we get really divided on. And it seems like the ones we consensus on generally are the ones where there's not a lot of representation in between. Like Florence, when she came in front of the GA, she was representing herself. We saw that, and we all voted for it. And I think that I'm nervous. I think that's what you did. I think that for me, in order for us to see what the process of the GA is really like, we should maybe do a lot of outreach first before trying to like break our heads about how this process works. Because I think what's going to help us really evaluate that is bringing in people who don't understand the process and don't know what this is all about. Because it's only kind of like when you get outside of yourself that you can see yourself. And I think that a big part of whatever next steps we do in the GA need to come from outside rather than from inside. Because there's a lot of voices out there. And, yeah.
I'm going to try to put together the things that I've heard that have spoken to me from tonight. One of the key words was prefigurative, which means that we're pre-figuring out how we're going to end up being, and there's going to be hopefully a lot more people joining us who will help us figure out, and that rather than a lot fewer people, which our General Assembly that's the reality that's been created. Because of what someone else said, which is fetishizing process, and that's a very good thing to realize what we're doing. Our imaginations as a group, unfortunately, not as individuals, but as a group, our imaginations have been very limited by the systems that we're used to seeing. So a bunch of people standing up and talking ineffectually at each other looks a lot like Congress, and that's what our General Assembly looks like. The spokes council thing might be a better idea. I sit in on those meetings, and it at least appears to be on the right track, which is to address our general sense that all of us are here because we are not heard in society and no one is, and then we come in here and then we're even less heard than we are anywhere else because of process. The process is, I guess Cindy's admitting that it was a mistake, however she set it up, but the process is say something, thank you for saying it. Next person, say something unrelated, thank you for saying it. Next person, okay, now it's time to vote. And we clap afterwards that we've made a vote, and our votes are a letter to the city, and the city doesn't matter. And that's the only thing we've ever accomplished is a letter, and we've done like 4 of them, and they each take 4 nights to to write, and we could write 100 letters that are all much better than the one that we vote on to send, but we forget that we're individuals coming together to assert our right to be individuals and part of a society. There was, the best thing of Occupy was making a community and all of us feeling like we were part of a community. Which brings me to the most important point, which is that us being together, unfortunately, for those in the suburbs who can't make it, or whatever, who have jobs, like myself sometimes, well, we do our best to make it, and then we're sharing space, and then we see each other smile, and we fight, like Cindy said, and everyone else said, and that's all good. And if we take that away and decide that Occupy can't possibly be meeting together because there's too many people in America, the 99%, where are we going to meet? Dilworth isn't big enough. Well, the point is you can meet in people's living rooms eventually, and it can be groups of 5 people. And when you bump into someone at the bar, instead of it being a stranger, suddenly, within a minute, you're both occupiers, and you get to talk about all the things that you think, and hopefully all the things that we do. And we're supposed to do stuff, which is the other thing that spoke to me from 3 different people, is that we're supposed to do stuff, and then be proud of what we did and show people, just like artists should do instead of selling their art. We are the movement that will be art for free, and fixing people's houses for free, and feeding people for free, and taking care of mentally ill people for free, even if they dominate our space and destroy our space. We're still gonna, that's our community. And next time we'll have more people, and we'll stop by their tents instead of not letting them know what the hell's going on for 3 months, and then being surprised that they're not part of the movement. Well, we could let these people who have never been spoken to by human beings for the past 10 years, because they've been marginalized, we can let them feel part of our community, which is all of us feel marginalized, and that's why we're here. That's one of the things that makes us different from the other 99%, is that we're sort of, we feel like either we have more to offer to society, and it's not asking us to, or not letting us, and that's why we're here. We're all wannabe activists, so, but we haven't been active because we've been so in love with GA and twinkling for each other and political correctness, and anyone saying anything that's not okay, which is mostly me a lot of the time in the beginning when I was still speaking, before I realized that there was no point in speaking. Well, people who have different points of view, that's why we're here. It's not to celebrate that, oh, there's a transvestite over there, and great, I'm in the same camp as a transvestite, but I'm never going to speak to them or care what they have to think or their experience. It's just they're welcome in my community. Go talk to them, ask them what it's like to be there. And that's enough. But I love you all, it's good that we're here, and we'll do better in spring.
So is it okay if we just bring it back to Mark and Cindy just for a couple minutes, and then we can have another show of hands. So there was a point that was brought up that a couple of the points that they both brought up earlier sort of contradicted each other, which I thought was interesting. And yeah. But I'm curious to hear Mark's response to you, and then anything else that you guys wanted to add on to what other folks have been saying, and we can open it back up.
Yeah, well, what I would say about that is I think that there are some points of agreement that we have, and I think that there are probably some things that we disagree on. So where do we agree? I mean, I think that this is I think Cindy mentioned this in passing, but I don't think maybe everyone hasn't seen this Frank Lutz thing. So a leading Republican consultant was talking to Republican governors about how to deal with Occupy Philly. And he said, I am scared to death of this movement. I'm scared to death of this movement because I'm afraid that it's going to change the way that people think about capitalism. This is an amazing thing. You know, there's not, there's not a lot of times in my life when I've seen a very, very mainstream political type of guy make that type of statement. And then he goes on to have a series of recommendations, and one of them is to not talk about, capitalism. He says, don't talk about jobs. Right? We talk about jobs, we're in trouble. You got to talk about careers, right? Whatever that means, right? But so it's a very, very Machiavellian thing. So now where we agree is, I agree that this is a time where we can talk critically about capitalism. And I think that is a very interesting time. Where we disagree. One is, I love We Are the 99%. I think it's great. And here you look, you run into the bumper sticker problem. People will always say, your slogan doesn't capture everything we want to capture. And it's true, you can never have there's only so much you can fit on a sign. But I think that for 4 words, we are the 5 words, about 99%, it encapsulates a lot. It encapsulates that our power is our numbers, it's our democracy, it's our reach, it's not our money. It encapsulates the fact that the system that we're living in, which is capitalism, in a particular form of capitalism, sort of a hyper-capitalist form that's accelerated in the last 30 years, but very, very few people are benefiting from that, right? That is 1%, and then 1% is sort of an arbitrary number. We could talk about 1/2 of 1%, or we could talk about the top 2%, whatever. But the point being is it really gets at the point. There's a very, very small sliver of society that's gotten the vast majority of the benefits of this system. And 99%, which is basically everybody, is, it suffers under the system in one way or another, in a variety of ways. The oppression of the system and people neglected and left behind by the system is vast. So I think that conveys a lot. And, if we talk about alternative slogans, commons, not capitalism, I like that. It's a nice sign. On the other hand, I think that's almost coded language in a way. Like commons is a word that means something to me and means something maybe to a lot of us. I mean, I think we are the 99% is an inclusive thing, and it's an opening to talk about systemic issues.
So yeah, maybe, I'm less concerned about what slogans, because you can't change, it was less about changing slogans than us changing, or if, I just really want to keep really emphasizing, I think this is a time, it'd be great if we did this more regularly, like once a week for a month or something, or twice, and actually just talked about what is it we want to see happen. And then I have no idea how we will actually make that happen, and it's not even just up to us, because that's why I think this movement's really powerful and intriguing for me, is it has to be up to, actually, as one of my friends said, 100% of society to want to do it, because if you understand it's systemic, then even the people that benefit the most also feel destroyed in certain ways by this world. And if we don't recognize that people don't suffer differently, aren't destroyed differently, damaged, socialized, I've just been intrigued, like you were. I really appreciate the way you wrapped up a lot of the comments, and that it's been really interesting to me to watch how you can't just like have a process that's going to work when people are also socialized to act certain ways, and we had no boundaries around whether that socialization was acceptable and when there were limits of it. I believe in people having boundaries for what's acceptable and accountability and who's going to implement it. And I don't know how the hell we do all those things, and regularity of who's there, and et cetera, et cetera. And so part of what I was pointing to is in all these ways we have to be much more imaginative, looking backward to some movements that have tried it on grand scales, like the Brazilian landless movement, which is for 25 years or something, I think, has had almost 2.5 million people trying to set up kind of more directly democratic autonomous communities where they've expropriated land and are trying to do free schools and free healthcare, and they're probably doing it badly, and they probably mess up, and etc. And actually look to examples of where people have had experiments that have gone on longer, and not for us just to look at other occupations, which is what I think we're getting lazy. We're like, oh, every occupation's doing it this way, and every occupation has a GA, and someone was talking about the idea, Colin, about the idea of a General Assembly. I think we should just throw everything open and be really creative and not have process meetings anymore for a month, and talk about what are ideas to actually be more democratic and inclusive and autonomous at the same time, and what does that look like, and what's the balance between the collective and the individual? Because it isn't about just doing our own thing either. And I really like what you said. It reminded me of the folks in Greece who've been for about 15 or 20 years carving out autonomous neighborhoods, building up social power, coming largely through anarchists and other radicals, but now connecting with immigrant movements and other movements, and building a giant social movement that's reached the brink of connecting with a severe economic crisis. Is they did General Assemblies that are groups of people that come in as affinity groups that don't have any decision-making power, but you present ideas and you debate and you argue, because Greeks like to argue. And maybe we should get together and actually argue out ideas in a nice way. I actually like argumentation about ideas. And then they go back to their groups, they argue some more about it, and then they put out literature and they do actions, and they know each other. And I've been really critical of that. So I'm like, but where do they decide things? But one of them said to me, we see each other every week, and we're arguing ideas, and we hear what each other's going to do, and we know, we trust each other. And then on the street, I'm like, oh, I know what Cindy's going to do, because I know her. And it's not like it's a mystery, right? Because we know each other. So another point I wanted that had come up in the discussion was, how do we balance that and trust each other? For those of you that came to the plaza the other night on that call, when we were waiting for the third dispersal order, a bunch of people ran around and whispered in people's ears, we're going to start running toward Rittenhouse when the end of the third dispersal comes up. And I knew those people and trusted. I didn't know those people 7 weeks ago. I knew those people. I trusted those people. I knew someone had thought about this before I did. I went. I didn't think for a minute that I was going to be in any more danger, or it felt consensual to me because I had a sense of who those people were. I felt like someone had figured it out and decided it was okay. But it wasn't through a GA, but it was democratic in an interesting way. But how do we do that, okay? So I guess I want to lastly come back to, I really want to think about, many of us, I look around this room and I don't know everyone, but I know a lot of us identify as people that want to see wholesale social transformation on non-hierarchical, egalitarian, directly democratic lines. And I think the challenge to us now is to really see, how do we build a movement that looks like that? How do we change society that looks like that? It's not just about slogans, it's about actual practice of doing that. I loved what you said, I love that, what you said about, we already did it. We did it in a lot of ways that were bad. Let's try it again and do it better. And we're going to get known as the people that do that kind of stuff. And I like that everywhere I go now, people talk about politics, because that's all, I love to talk about that. And that was remarkable. 8 weeks ago, people would say, oh, that's so boring, you're talking about politics? And now that's all anyone wants to talk about. I love that. That's my world. So that's like a huge, huge shift. So how do we continue to shift that, knowing that we actually can't control it either, right? I'm sorry, I'm all about tensions and problems. Okay, and the last thing I want to say is for those of you that were Dilworth, and right, the second time we came around, there's 100 of us when people set up a tent and held it up, and they were like, this is an intense moment, this is an intense moment. I was laughing so hard because it is a tense, intense moment. And none of us know what to do, so we hold tents up in the air and go, what do we do now? And then the police started storming us and brought horses. And that moment symbolically, to me, was what we're doing. We have no idea. We're balancing tense of intensity up that we don't even know what's going to happen with it.
The hand in the back, and then we'll do another round of hands.
We live in a community. My efforts toward pursuing an interest in keeping the permit, for instance, like the idea was to hold the space as a community. We need to be together. It just sort of naturally comes. The trust and the cooperation and the conversations come when you spend time together and you actually get to know one another. You have each other's back in a much more meaningful way than if you're just sort of organized on a list and people are calling you. I was always urging people to go up and talk, go introduce yourself. If you want to find out what anyone is here for, if you want to find out how to get done what you brought here to be done, talk to 5 people, ask them why they're here, and I bet you're going to find someone who has similar interests, and you're going to find ways to get that done. I was never online or having a phone when I lived the entire time out there, but I knew what was going on because I was constantly running around talking to everybody there. I don't understand the need for a process when the process is just engagement with your people, especially on a limited level like that. Like, why do we have to send emails when I can just run over to the east side of City Hall and have that conversation? It's not that difficult. It becomes so hyper-mediated and abstracted that we lose sight of, why do we have to have meetings about doing stuff? I can talk to 5 people and get an idea in my head, and we can go clean a lot tomorrow. There doesn't have to be a meeting about that. We can come back and say, hey, since we're all in the same space, guess what we did today? And then people are like, oh, that's a great idea. I wanted to do this. Anybody? Don't overthink it. I feel like it is way overthought. The idea of having it on a grand scale is great, but at some point it really has to start. People naturally work effectively on a tribal level. That's a small scale group. Once we have to go past that and we need a medium in order to communicate, I think that's like a dangerous step. We haven't even started this step. This sort of cellular level of communication. This is a great size group, but, I remember when the first split with the POC committee, I walked out of the facilitators because the process was making me lose my mind. I went over to the POC, and the first thing they did after being presented with the process was be like, fuck that, and break up into small groups, right? Instantly. 5 groups, 5 people here, 3 people here. Like, that's sane. Because that's how we can hear one another. Speaking into a microphone, even the people's mic, is not having a conversation, right? And the democratic process is supposed to involve everybody. And everyone also should be completely informed. This has not been done. This is the hoarding information and manipulation of information has been the key of this whole process and why it's come to this point, I think. And if we're talking about capitalism, Occupy Wall Street has all this money. Why don't we just burn all the money? Like, seriously, I'm fucking serious. Like, get rid of the money. Do something else. I've been telling people I'm going to be 40, for a long time. Do something else. I'm anti-authoritarian, non-coercive in my philosophy. I've raised 2 children that way. They're teenagers now. It works. You can interact with one another in a way that's information sharing and resource aware. That doesn't have to do with agendas. Your agenda destroys a conversation, right? So if we understand that we are, and part of my medic training was to point out immediately that everybody here is in a vulnerable population, or we wouldn't be here. Some people have been more exposed to harm than others, but it is, we're none of us okay by this, you know, like everyone's hurt. So to go in and really, like, I've had these conversations, like, it seems like, you know, this whole premise of, like, content of character and color of skin, well, I really think that most of the people who go and promote that and promote how open-minded they are forgetting that they're actually reacting to what they see more often than not. And, you know, it takes a lot of listening to get to what is behind what you're looking at any given moment. And the particular criminalization of populations on City Hall was incredibly offensive to me. And I specifically mean, like, drug and alcohol, mental health, and homeless people, who I was right in the front line interacting with. So
we have more hands for other people who want to talk,
sure.
please. Just so I can see, like, people who want to just raise your hand, just so I have a sense, and then I can kind of do it in order. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna start here and then go back.
Alright. A lot of what Zio just said was really awesome. I kind of wanted to respond to what Cindy said about debating and arguing and the importance of that.
Louder, Jen?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I wanted to respond to what Cindy said about debating and arguing and how important that is to stretching your own assumptions and learning something new about the people around you. My concern is that we won't stretch ourselves without a process. And if you'll just be patient with me for a second, I'll try to explain that. Because I think a lot of you think that process is limiting. And the way I see it and the way I understand what people are saying about affinity groups and how you can argue and you can debate and you can press one another for answers because you trust one another and you will give them your time and they'll give you theirs. I feel like we have to step outside the bounds of that trust that we have and the people that we know and the people whose politics we share, because it is a really diverse community. It is just coming from so many different angles, and I don't know how we can truly give each other the time of day when we don't want to necessarily hear what other people are saying, unless there is a process that facilitates that communication so that we can all get on the same level and
Just
not
changing your
intimidate
mind.
one another.
It's all inside.
Yeah, and I mean, Zio, you're making me suddenly romantic for Dilworth Plaza. Like, what
Wasn't
is
it great?
that?
Wasn't it great?
I mean, it is great when you have a community that comes to a single space and talks to one another. We're not going to have that anymore. And we wouldn't have it even before the eviction because the conditions are just too difficult.
I don't believe that's true, and I don't know what we would be here doing if we weren't aiming for that. You know.
Yeah, I just feel that process will allow us to get into those many different spaces and still have a network to check in with one another. And it is about report backs, but it's also about getting multiple groups on the same initiatives from different angles so that direct action can work with people of color, can work with messaging. I swear, messaging can do things for you people if you only let them. So that's all I'll say.
Carrie, is that?
I just want to tell a little story. I was sitting somewhere. This was back when the Worth was all right. Sorry, I was sitting somewhere. Two stories actually. I was sitting somewhere, just hanging out, and this guy came up to me. He was dressed in a suit, and he sat down with me, and we started talking. And he said, you know, first when this stuff started happening, I was like, And he told me, you know, he had been to Fox Business School at Temple, and he said, and then I realized, why am I being so selfish? And we talked for a while. I saw him like 8 more times in his suit. He started coming all the time. And he was the kind of guy that I never would have expected to come, you know? Middle manager, making a good living, business school grad, you know, and the occupation just made him like self-aware in that little moment where he was sort of like, why am I being so selfish? And I thought that was amazing. I was blown away by it, and it was awesome. The other thing I just wanted to share was that my tent was in a neighborhood with a lot of homeless guys, and I got to know them really well. And excuse me for swearing, but they're fucking awesome people. They're family, you know. One of them, we called each other bro and sis, and I'd never had that closeness, you know. And now when I walk around, I look everybody in the eye. And if they ask me for something and I don't have anything, I stop and say, listen, I don't have any money, but do you smoke? Because I gotta smoke. And they'll say, yeah, thanks. And we'll have a little chat. And I recognize their humanity more than I ever did before. Because I know that these are people who've been shit on through all of their lives. And that doesn't mean that, you know, that just means that they need to be recognized as human more, you know, instead of ignored and shit on by the police, shit on by everyone who walks by.
Shit on by Occupy.
And shit on by Occupy.
Frankly.
So that's all.
I just see the hands again that were up for, okay. So, you and then you're next. Good.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I just had kind of a direct response to the comments about the process and the process being kind of the problem and decentralizing that. I felt really frustrated. I acknowledge what you were saying, but I felt kind of frustrated hearing you talk about that because it just seemed like it was so sort of contingent on being constantly present. And in that sense, really exclusive of anyone who isn't there to constantly be able to be receiving all of that information. So I feel like that makes sense in terms of a physical 24-hour occupation. I think that that's awesome in terms of day-to-day operational stuff. But in terms of things on a greater or a larger, more encompassing scale, I don't know if that's, or at least it seems to me without like hashing it out fully, it doesn't seem that applicable to the movement as a whole. So I think it'd be interesting to discuss maybe ways that there can be crossover and whatever problems with both of those schools of thought could be addressed, whatever. And also, I had another thought about language, which is what you said before, and I'm really into the idea of language and coded language, because that's what the bad guys are using all the time to talk to each other. That's what Sarah Palin uses to trigger responses from the super far religious right. And I feel like analyzing that, instead of ignoring it, which I feel is what a lot of people have been doing for a long time, I think acknowledging that it's a tactic that's being used all the time. And a lot of us don't pick up on it because we don't know the words and stuff. Acknowledging that, and then being able to just be more conscious about the language that we're using, I think is a real, and I've been thinking about this a lot over the past several weeks. I'm really glad that you brought that up. So I think it's definitely something to think about, and maybe people who are particularly interested in that, for them to sort of meet up and discuss that at greater length. Because yeah, that's been like on my brain constantly thinking about that. So I just wanted to, it's like awesome that you brought that up.
And there are hands in the back too. I've seen a few here, so I just wanted to see if you have a sense of other people that wanted to talk. So I have some here too. Okay. All right. Cool. So
yeah, I have a small, perhaps modestly sized request for Cindy in particular, because it's something you've said a couple of times about history, and for everyone else here. I think everyone is keyed into the way that there is a tension between the democratic proceduralism on the one hand, which is absolutely vital and spiritually fulfilling and transformative, and is a way of being the there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. There's a way that it enacts the change we want to see. But there is still a tension between that, the day in, day out democratic proceduralism, and something else which we might call goals, visions, strategy, etc. And without ever wanting to compromise the former, I would love to leave here tonight to set up a forum for discussing the latter. And maybe this is redundant because it already exists, but if you in particular, as the first person to go, would be willing to curate a small set of readings, if you talk about 89 or 84, either PDFs, links, or a set of Xeroxes, and meet back here or some other site in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would really appreciate that.
Did you want to respond to that, Kristen?
No,
Okay,
it's good
cool.
idea.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about energy, and it's wintertime, and so if I had to do this every night, like I love hearing people talk, but if I had to do this every night, I would feel really oppressed. Just because like, my energy would just disappear, and there's other life that's going on. So I'm thinking it's wintertime, and that there has to be some. Cindy, you were talking about how people need to be seen, which is sort of a famous. Oh, it's not famous, but the British psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott was very into that idea that people had to be seen to feel valued. But he believed in creativity and playing, and just like sunshine and energy. And I keep thinking of like David Solnit, was out here from California, and he was like on to dressing up as Robin Hood and going into banks and creating a big ruckus, and he's talking about having flowers and stuff, and we're in Philly, and everybody's like, what? And that to me, that's what I need to see more. I don't know. I need to feel more like it's going to be winter, and I'm going to want to stay home and with my dogs, and because that would be more comforting than sitting in a room for hours. So I'm just trying to think about that as something that's. To think about, how to get that energy, especially at this time of year, and it's heading towards low energy time.
I just wanted to say that we're going to try to wrap this up by 9 on the topic of being in a room for hours. So I just want to say that. So other people who haven't been able to speak yet, I saw your hand, and then I'll see you next. Okay. And people in the back are next. Cool.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to share an experience that I had recently, because I feel like we have a lot of conversations amongst ourselves, and I think we disagree about a lot of things, but we also agree about a lot of things, and so there's certain things we don't think about, that I know I don't think about, I guess is what I mean. And I had the chance over Thanksgiving to hang out with Republicans, and I tried to make an agreement with my partner not to talk about Occupy when we went into the home. And of course it was the first thing that we talked about. And so I just wanted to talk about it because I think that a lot of people, we talk about building community, and I think that one thing, especially over the holidays that are about to happen, is that we're going to probably be with our families, and our families might not hold the same political views that we have, and I think it's a really good opportunity to, talk to our families in general, which is a good thing, and build community that way, but also, if our families disagree, to try to win them over. I had a really interesting time talking about this, and I found the anarchist track wasn't a good one. The state stuff doesn't go very well. But what I found was really, really effective, and I wanted to share this, is talking about finance. Finance is a really crazy thing. And if you can just focus on that, I found talking about the bailout and having numbers on the bailout and being this is a really, really crazy thing. There's there's the numbers are generally coming up, and generally people who Fox News is really high on numbers. So when you talk about numbers, people will believe you. And so I just wanted to share that because I found it a really valuable experience. So if in terms of thinking about how we're messaging, I found finance really helpful, and I found talking about numbers really helpful. So I just wanted to share that.
We'll get some people in the back.
So I wanted to support some of the things that Theo was saying about, about community and the community that we built and the positives and negatives to it. And I guess the concern I have with deciding to split off into our groups working on different projects is that I'm worried that it's going to turn into affinity groups working on projects and an Occupy Philly Facebook page, and that's going to be it. And one of the things that I found really valuable at having that site was the, to my mind, pretty unprecedented collaboration between folks who had never had any experience with homelessness or homeless advocacy and homeless folks living on the site at Occupy Philly. And yeah, like, we fucked up a lot, and there are a lot of ways Occupy Philly didn't actually follow through on the voice they were claiming to give. But that feels like something that I would be really sad if we, like, lost that or didn't, like, try to figure out some way to move that forward. And I want to support something that Cindy said about the, like, ideas from society that we bring into these, like, supposedly transformative democratic spaces. And so, like, I've been part of the facilitation team, so you can all help me with things.
Or we could apply.
But one of the things that I've seen is how many people who've had no experience with any kind of even halfway radical politics have been coming in here. And so, like, yeah, when a lot of those people show up, it's going to look like Congress. It's going to look like voting, right? It's not going to look immediately transformative. But the way I've seen those folks move in the 2 months that Occupy Philly existed is, like, pretty fucking profound. So I also don't want to lose that piece, and, like, we should absolutely be totally critical and figure out ways we can do things better. And, like, we accomplished a hell of a lot, too.
Jasmine?
Yeah, with Occupy, I was kind of, it was some parts that I definitely felt like, wow, you really fucked up there. But the thing about Occupy is that we need to save it, and it definitely has a lot of benefits to it. It's a space for us to, like, really talk about our ideas with each other and actually get our points across, even if it's not heard that much. But it's still, like, a central form that is missing from society. We don't even get to talk to each other like this. We don't really get to congregate with each other except if we're being talked to at a lecture where we have our ideas justified by somebody else who's just talking back to us. Which is fine because it raises your consciousness as well. But I think the crucial point now with Occupy is that we need to come to, to go into a direction where we do not need a settlement, an encampment, where we have the consciousness of Occupy living within us, and how we speak, and how we communicate with each other, and how we react with each other. We need to have that where it isn't just a physical thing. It is actually, help me out with this word. Not only tangible, but something that is in our psyche where we can recognize our own discourse with each other. We don't feel like we have to go out on a limb to be politically correct. It's just raw dialogue between people. And that's what we need to come to. It's just like, that space is gone. It's taken from us. But we still have each other, and we still have our minds, and we still have a crucial time for us to raise our consciousness levels. There's a lot of people that don't know what the fuck is going on there. There's a lot of people in Occupy that really don't give a shit, except that they're not going to get a job outside of college, or, I'm not going to get health insurance, or I'm not going to get a job. When there's bigger fucking things out there. But, they can still grow. And that's what this movement is about. We still need to grow. And, I don't know. It's just so essential and crucial for us to, take this moment in time to take a stand and not just, only be connected to that space. We need to have the space within our minds to progress this. That's, the crucial thing. It's not just a space. It's within ourselves. And I don't know, it's just hilarious, how people are just oh, well, the people that are camping out there, it's evicted, they're gone, so it's done. And that's what they want. But it's not done. It's could be so much more. It's just so amazing, and I think that's where we need to turn.
There's a couple of hands that have been up here for a while, I think. I'll get you and then you after.
A couple of things. I think that one of the main things, we have to turn from occupiers to organizers. And we, like Cindy says, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think people need to educate themselves to learn what the wheel is. And I just want to touch on a couple of different things that people mentioned. One of the things people talked about is how can you do autonomous actions, and how can you do any kind of action, and have the element of surprise if we know the police are there. But you know what? You just keep moving. The police have always been there. I invite people to read about COINTELPRO, learn about what that's all about, and how people still politically, organize themselves. People were all over us in Seattle. I was one of the people who helped organize stuff in Seattle, and what made it work, the same with, even though it didn't always work at, like say, the IMF, the World Bank, RNC here, all of those things. But we used a spokesman, which is why from the beginning I've always been an advocate of some kind of a model involving a spokes council. But is that it still empowers individual groups, affinity groups, work groups, whatever you want to call them, to do what they need to do. And that's where the trust comes in. And that's where you build these actions that are what take the element of surprise into it. I teach blockades, and what I always tell people is it's a mindset thing. I can teach you how to lock down to a 1,500-pound barrel, but I don't make nuclear weapons. So my mindset is in a completely different way, and it's all about, like you were just saying, occupying within your mind and being able to change that mindset. But you can't do that and help change other people's mindset if there's nowhere for other folks to come into. Otherwise, you get cliquish. And I've been in Philly for a long time. I find Philly to be really cliquish. Might not be a popular statement to say out loud, but I have found it extremely cliquish, and that's my biggest fear. What we're going to go back to is if we're going to be organizers, we still need to be able to come together and bring in new folks. Because I met so many folks through Occupy Philly who have never done anything. I trained a group with Direct Action that I thought 95% of them had experience before Occupy Philly. Like 2 of them did. And I was really surprised, but I was inspired by that. And I think that that's one of the things that we don't want to lose touch with. And when you talk about, bringing in the other 99%, another unpopular thought is they're Republican too. And that's really hard. And I do have a Republican aunt who really is really great and thinks that the whole Occupy stuff was awesome. And really the whole family stuff of bringing it together. But if we don't have a place for people from the outside to at least be able to plug into something, we have no transparency, and we're just individual cliquish groups. And that's where our big challenge comes into. And all of that comes in with what Sarah, I think Cindy's talking about, is like the goals and the structure, and looking at something, and it's called strategic campaign planning. We can look at this as you would say, a campaign against Starbucks or a campaign against an old growth forest, and using at Home Depot, and actually looking at what a strategy plan looks like. And an Occupy movement is not new. We used to just, in Seattle and all that, we call them conversion spaces. They just didn't last for a really long time. But I'm an Earth Firster. We just called it, out there in the woods. I sat in a logging room in Idaho for 45 days. I've been working with the big mountain resistance for years, and they're occupying land. So we have to kind of change how we view it, but at the same time making sure that if nothing else, we are inclusive. And even if that challenges, or especially if that challenges our own minds of talking, like Cindy said, to people you really don't have much else in common, but their lives are fucked up too by this system.
Here, and I just wanted to say, it's a little after 8:30 now. If people are cool with keeping this going for about 20 more minutes, I do want to bring it back to Mark and Cindy before we wrap up. So, cool. See you then.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. Sorry, softly. I come as somebody who has no experience with any of the organizing that's been going on. I had a very tangential relationship with Occupy Philly. I walk through the camp sometimes. Certainly admired from close or afar. And I also am somebody who lives definitely in a hole. I study a lot. And but it was something that, even having very strong opinions or feeling marginalized in my family or in, my work, definitely people I work with support the cops in this. It was really something to see, the videos on the internet of people sitting down on the ground in California being pepper sprayed in the face, or being beaten. Or here, when it was cleared out, walking to the subway and enjoying every morning seeing, the camp and feeling very, like, you okay? Feeling very empowered by that, to just see it one day, it's gone. It's empty. And there are cops barricading the whole thing. And you were saying about systemic change, and in some ways, the epistemological space, I hear it, it's very important, and I think it's a good thing. But something in which, really for me, I'm here tonight because of seeing that the other day, and walking in that, and you see the system, you see the cops are in front of you, you see the empty space. And that's very powerful, and it is, and I think, very powerful for a lot of people to see, like they've seen in Syria, like they've seen in Egypt, like they see in Palestine, that this system is opposed to you, it's fighting you, it's holding you down, it's oppressing you, and it's very concrete. And the ways in which, say, in Egypt, it turned very quickly, or Iran in 1979, it turned very quickly, even in the police themselves, once people saw the system, they see it very concretely, and provocation in that, I think, is a powerful thing.
See hands for people who do lines. Okay.
Okay, so I want to echo a lot of what's been said, and I feel like feel myself getting really emotional about I know how much work and love so many people have put in to Occupy Philly, and I've had a couple conversations over the last few days of people that I've just met and have become instantly so close to and so trustful of. So I've asked things like, oh, what do you do outside Occupy? And I'm like, there's a life outside of Occupy. People do things other than this. But with that said, I want to kind of share what's helped put this in perspective for me. This entire Occupy movement is so new and so young. I mean, we're like a baby taking its first steps, and someone slapped a jetpack on us. And we're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna fuck up. But we have this chance to bring, there's a lot of attention on us, and like Cindy said, whether people like us or hate us, they're paying attention, and we have this chance to bring all this stuff to a main stage, especially we spoke with Max Rameau from Take Back the Land, who pointed out to us that Philly in particular has been able to take this general everything is fucked up, and especially financial economic stuff, and bring it to community issues that affect us, and that's going to be stuff that even we're not good at lots of things, and I think that we need to to bring that to each other, to be well, wait, this is fucked up too. We're going about it all wrong, and things the other night, we need to take what's the lessons from that and realize the other night our raid was really educational to some folks, and we have a chance to be hey, look, you don't have to wait till people's skulls get cracked to point out that this is police brutality. Luckily, people didn't sustain really, really serious injuries, but we still had a chance to see what's going on. So I just want to kind of put this in perspective that yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, but we also have all of this momentum and all of this power completely instantly, and that's a really hard thing to do. Also, I just want to let everybody know there is a press conference tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Friends Center. In that, I don't know if people came back there after we had to leave City Hall. That big front room with the projectors. I don't know, what is it called? Can you announce that?
Rufus Jones room.
The Rufus Jones room, I guess.
It's right in the front of when you walk in the front.
Yeah,
it's right there.
They are tomorrow at 11 o'clock if people want to come through.
Then a couple hands in the back.
Yeah, thank you, folks. And it's 11 a.m. tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Just want to confirm. Okay. I don't want to take up too much of anybody's time, partly because I'm so glad that everybody's come out tonight. But what I'm hearing in all this whole conversation is that people everywhere really seem to be crying out for, and yes, needing some sort of community. And I use that word community very deliberately because it may just have vanished from from our lives these days for whatever specific reasons. I'm not going to go off on some sociological kind of rant, but people, from what I can see, really are crying out for it, and we do need it. Actually, which is one thing that I think is really going to keep this movement going, and it's something I hadn't expected to hear, but I am hearing it, and I am glad. And as far as the homeless are concerned, they might have been, how do I want to put this? They might have been, in general, defecated on pretty much their whole lives, but I don't happen to think Occupy Philadelphia has defecated on them. Because for one thing, when we had those first meetings right before we started occupying on Thursday, October 6th, a homeless outreach committee was put together, and I'm sure there are any number of people on it. So I just wonder if any of those people specifically might want to speak.
They all disappeared immediately in the first few days.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
I did a lot of homeless outreach personally, so
Same.
I can tell you right. So we know we were living there.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's just too bad, but I figure it's just one of those things. But we also might want to be thinking specifically about demands we want to come up with. I hope this isn't just repeating what other people are saying, but I have my own things that I want to be part of the conversation, so to speak, part of the movement. One of them is campaign finance reform. That first and foremost, probably. Another is a Project Apollo for energy. And if you want to talk about that specifically, then please come up to me afterwards. I can give you a great website. Another thing I just thought of a few minutes ago standing here is supporting bigger and better family planning, not just across the United States, but around the world. And I'm sure everybody's got other things too, but those are three. So let's strike back at those people who might have been saying, oh, the movement is too amorphous. It doesn't have one particular message. Let's come up with our own demands in our own voices and bring them to the discussion and keep it going. And sure, I know it's winter now, and the movement in general might, at least in the Northeast, and certainly here in Philadelphia, you might want to go on some sort of winter hiatus, but that doesn't mean, I don't think that means it happens. It has to. I wish I could volunteer a space to at least have smaller meetings, even on the scale, at least having smaller meetings in.
We're getting a space in West Philly.
Great, great.
For working.
At least till January 15th.
What could be more appropriate? I'm serious. January 15th. This is Martin Luther King Day. Beautiful.
Hopefully for longer.
I couldn't be happier. Seriously. But no, this stuff all just sounds great. So let's just keep adding to it and keep bringing our own particular parts to it, and let's show everybody across the United States and around the world that there's one of the signs I was holding just a few nights ago over in Joe Plaza said, this is just the beginning. Thank you.
Just the beginning. Where's the end?
I just wanted to say that I see a tie-in with actually talking about what everyone's saying, in that any group that I've been involved with that utilized process, failed in that or faced the same problems that we did when egos and agendas were not left behind. And that's where, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Tio, hi. I really agree with what she was saying, in that we come at things with our own egos, our own judgments and assumptions. I think as activists, we're worse than non-activists in thinking that we know what we're doing, we know where we're going. And until we kind of see, when she's talking about we can't de-escalate something, or we can't even have an idea or an agenda unless we take a look around us and are able to, with sort of a new, open perspective, see what others are doing, see their experiences, and know what's going on around us. Trying to humble ourselves and see what are we doing wrong with ourselves. I think that process, absolutely, I'm a person who probably has stuck too much to process and direct democracy and all of that, but I've seen it fail and fall on its, on its ass because of egos and cliquishness and agendas completely destroying that. So I think that there's a combination of saying that one can't actually work without the other. That's all I have to say.
We have a time for a few more, and then we'll go with that. So.
Three things. One, I think that it's important that we continue to have a public occupation somewhere. Winter notwithstanding, whatever, I'll be happy to camp out there until hell freezes over. That's one. Two, anger is unattractive. Anger pushes people away. While there are many things that have happened over the 2 months that we were out here that made us all angry, we should acknowledge our anger, we should state our anger, and then our forgiveness immediately thereafter. It's much easier to achieve things if you are for specific things rather than if you are against things. And we need to be aware of the things that we have done in the past that have not been successful fully, and be willing to try new things that we haven't tried yet, different tactics, different messages, different ways of interacting with the police, you know, throughout our group. If one person's screaming hate at the cops, and another person standing right next to that person is screaming love at the cops, it's very confusing.
But it's okay. But it's okay. That's the way everyone's different, right?
Hey everyone. I just wanted to say losing the plaza was really heartbreaking. I think a lot of us are really sad to see that go, but I'm actually, now that I think about it, incredibly excited because I feel like now all of this energy we focused on this one place is about to be unleashed into the entire city. And a lot of us are talking about community and how great it felt to have that community. And I think we need to remember that we all live in communities, but it doesn't feel that way because we don't talk to people. We don't walk out our doors. I don't know who in my neighborhood knows about Occupy Philly, but I live in South Philly and I don't think anybody cares, and that makes me sad. And it is winter, and it's cold outside, and I'm going to spend a lot of time at home. That doesn't mean I don't want to stop occupying. And so, an idea I had was to perhaps, if we can't occupy a space, to occupy a time, choosing a time and a day, asking everyone to walk out on the street, see who's there, and just talk
Every
to
neighborhood
everybody.
every neighborhood association has a block captain.
Oh, let's
It's
talk to our
easier,
block
it's already
captains.
there.
Let's all do that. Let's all make sure that happens.
It doesn't matter, they're people, they're just people, they're your neighbors.
Yeah.
Talk to them.
Talk to them. We really need to talk to people. We need to galvanize people and get them together. So when we occupy spring, there are 1,000 times more of us, you know?
Good idea. Any more hands for
Yeah, just speaking on the idea of like on the idea of like what's next for us, and thinking of strategies and goals. I had a chance to be at the strike in Oakland on November 2nd, and it was the really beautiful part of it was that there were no cops for almost the entire day. They came later when there was less people. But when there was thousands and thousands of people in the streets, they were afraid to send cops. And pretty much nothing. So if you can picture everything that's been happening in Philly, but, you know, attended by the usual ranks of riot police, you know, fully geared and, oh, am I going to get my ass kicked? There wasn't any of that at all, and almost no violence. Definitely no violence to people, a little violence to banks, almost none of that too. But to me, it really spoke to the power of what the Occupy thing has really taken the country, is that it captures people's imaginations in huge part because it's not asking permission. It's just doing something that's beautiful, and enough people see that and connect with it and say, okay, that's what we're going to do. So whatever we do from here, I hope that we keep that in mind, the idea of that permission from the state is really not just secondary, or not, it's like, we don't want to do that. We want to find the things, the way that we want to see the world, and then just do it. And what's incredible to me, like I've been living in Philly for 10 years, to see all of these people, Jesus, I've never seen people before like this, and it's, you know, so many, and wow, where's everyone been? But it's because there wasn't a place for people to come. There wasn't, maybe people didn't feel a way to plug in, or just didn't feel connected enough. Finally something happened where people did feel connected enough. If whatever we do, we got to keep that spirit up, because there's more of us out there, clearly. Like, I've been in a number of talks here where it was 10 people, and God, it just, the world's pretty fucked up. Like, does really no one care? Like, you go out on South Street and there's a million people out there, you're like, Jesus, what's going on? But yeah, it really is about connecting people. That's all.
Yeah, first I think it was a really, really good conversation. I just wanted to say something real quick about just like sort of in defense of process. Because I know there's been a lot of like, I've seen people get shut out, whatever, during the GAs, and I know it could work better, but we just live in a society where there's and a couple of people brought this up, where there's so many things that, for instance, are brought into Occupy that come from the general culture, which is like super authoritarian, patriarchal, racist, and without process, that stuff just takes over. And I think we saw it in a bunch of different spaces. We saw it in the media tent for sure, and that was like a huge struggle to get over that kind of like organic influence from this culture. So, I mean, I just want to say that we can do it different, but I think a process is super important so that we can consciously create a space that does include everybody. And I guess another thing too is just like I've seen this kind of like duality between sort of like collective thought and real individualistic ideas here too. And I think that's kind of like a thing where I think process can help too, because this is like a collective movement, and at the same time, in this kind of like in the same way that all these like authoritarian, for instance, ideas from society are coming into our movement. Same thing with individualism. People are like this is my thing. I just have to be heard. I have to say it all the time. It all ties together, but I think that's like one of the most important things just to shut down. Like, you can't be heard all the time. Every other comment, every other whatever, you already have all this social space, That's all.
It's almost 9. I just wanted to give a couple more minutes for Christian to make some comments, and then maybe we could have like a couple minutes too after that for anyone who has announcements to make, and then we can kind of just break this up into more informal conversation. Is that cool with everyone? So.
Maybe I'll just start to just pick up on what Dave said, because I've noticed it in every conversation. I just feel like we're so damaged by the system we live in, it's going to take years to undo it. And one of my favorite, I always use this when I talk, but I love the third declaration of the Lakandan Jungle, which is one of the most beautiful theoretical pieces. But they reflect back on like what they've done over the past 15 years and how strong capitalism is. And at one point they talk about how it's been 15 years in their autonomous communities, and they start a revolution, and that their kids are wholly different people, and their kids will be able to do something they never could even have imagined because they didn't grow up in that society. So I think we have to like stretch out our time frame. But one thing I've noticed here tonight is almost everybody talks in binaries, and I really appreciate that you said, it isn't like one person said maybe we should get rid of the GAs because they're not working. Then we're basically saying we're for hierarchical structures where some people get to decide. And I'm committed to us figuring out how can we decide things in non-hierarchical ways, and that it's going to look really difficult and it's going to take time, but it's also not that by itself. So how are we also going to transform how we feed and clothe and house each other? And how are we also going to transform how we're socialized? And how we're blah, 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 blah. And we have to do that all at once. And on the one hand, that seems overwhelming, but I always feel like that's what's sort of been beautiful about the experiment we just did, and why I've never I've like lived for moments like that, and I want to keep, I'm like, what about Occupy Winter? Actually, like, okay, we can have snowball fights, we can do fun things. So to me, it's like we actually were trying to experiment with the holistic transformation of everything at once, and it was hard and agonizing and exhausting, and so many days I was like, I have never felt so alive. There was one week where just everybody kept saying that to me all week, and it's like we were trying to do everything at once, we were doing everything badly, and yet we were doing everything differently and well. And I really like what you said about the space inside us, and so there's a dialectic, which means developmental logic between two things where one influences the other, between transforming the self and transforming society, and they have to happen simultaneously. processes by themselves don't work unless our ethics are different, unless we have enough to eat, unless we, and so how do, we have to experiment. So I'm now committed to wanting to do, those of you who were at Arch Church Street on Saturday, last Saturday, where there was like 300 or 400 of us, and we did a process that was non-decision-making process where we basically decided how that occupation eviction night was going to look just by us brainstorming together in a way that felt like we were listening to each other and it worked. And we need to do more of that. So I would like to do, I love that idea of maybe coming together a few times over really specific topics for 2 hours and honing in on, let's just brainstorm creative ideas on how the hell we can make process work. And then it won't work when we try it, but we'll try it. And how do we brainstorm what it would be like to have spaces where we can find each other that will look different, or whatever those topics are for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that's the task I'm taking on. And the task I want a lot of you to take on is to come to those. But also is, I've been part of the media tent, which we basically had to abandon because white guys who think they get to talk all the time and turned into reasonable solutions, and drove me crazy and out. We created a site called Occupy Philly Media, which is user-generated. And I heard so many beautiful stories, especially yours. I'm prone to like getting very emotional. I was going to start crying when you gave that story. And just the image of the one day versus the next day, write that up and post it on the site, please. And everyone who told stories here, write that up, because that's how we get people expand this, by us telling our stories. Like you said, you went home and some of us don't have family. Like, I think we should problematize families. Some families aren't so great, and some people don't want to go home with their families. And we made a different kind of family, in a sense, that's where. But let's tell our stories. Go there and register, occupyphillymedia.org. Okay, and my 2 more minutes of wrapping up. I really want to come back to, it isn't just enough to talk to each other. It isn't just enough to take over space. It isn't just enough to talk about, a few greedy people or this. It's about goddamn power imbalances. Whether that looks like institutionalized forms of racism or homophobia or, structures of, it isn't just money. Money is just a surface phenomena. Finance is a surface phenomena. I get what you're saying about bringing numbers home, but that broke my heart when you said that, because that's what capitalism does. It quantifies, and we're trying to make quality of life. So, again, I really appreciative of Frances Fox Piven speaking. She said, what this movement has done, and it's what you were pointing to, is it's brought this ethical, it fronted ethics. It had this qualitativeness about it, and we still do. So the slogan that's there that we can actually use, which we don't have to make up a new one, is occupy everything. And I know people problematize that, but what I love about that is it's occupying our hearts and psychic space and geographic space and temporal space and all the spaces, and it's exactly the alternative to capitalism, which takes things from us, and we want to bring it back. We want to take it back. I get that people have problematized the settler language in it and the whose land is it, but that's only opened up that space. So I really liked the night we came back, we were kicked off the plaza. The signs really shifted over those 2 days. I really think we should think of the imagery of the two. There's a great photo in the Philadelphia Inquirer of a bulldozer picking up one of the tents in the background. Someone make that into a poster. There's really, the signs changed dramatically. It was less about corporate personhood or corporations are bad or we need to, it was suddenly the signs were so much about you can't evict an idea. Why is that catch on? Because it's this qualitative dimension. It's this the idea. It's an ethical impulse that we want to take the world back. And one of the signs, occupy everything with hearts. I went around and took pictures of all the signs that night, and they really dramatically shifted to people talking about systemic power structure things as opposed to us individuals. So I really, again, want to say when we come back to strategizing, let's first talk about what it would mean to transform the whole of everything, and then work strategies out of that. You see, there's one other note. I wanted to say before I stopped. I'm like, upside down. Okay. And, yeah, sorry, I'll just end on that because I can't find my one other note. Oh, and that was it. A very specific thing, an act of solidarity afterward if you want. You can make an announcement. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have a space for announcements right after Mark's done speaking.
So I guess I just wanted to draw out some of the comments that were really exciting to me. I'm glad that Oakland came up at the end of the talk here, because that was a moment where this movement where tens of thousands of people were taking part in this. I think we've talked a lot about building our community and the importance of community. We've talked a lot about the prefigurative aspects of this movement. But, to me, that has to be put in a context. And prefigurative work is something that goes on day in and day out and can go on for years. This is going to be the 35th anniversary of this space, right, which is an alternative space, which is an amazing thing. But this is, that's 35 years. We have, food co-ops that are alternative spaces. We have, cooperative houses that are alternative spaces. But this is a little bit different, right, because this is building community and this is prefigurative stuff that's important, but it's happening here in a context where everyone's paying attention, right? Another comment I like is not just how do we build community, how do we build it in a way that we bring groups together to do mass civil disobedience and mass direct action with some messaging. I thought that was a great comment. Comment over here, how do we avoid not just building community that are cliques, which we don't really know how to do, How do we build community in a way that keeps this part of the national discussion? I think that does. It takes some strategic action planning, some strategic campaign planning, and I'd like to see an interplay between the community building and the prefigurative aspects and the building of trust and the building of relationships. But for me, again, that makes possible a level of nonviolent escalation, a level of direct action that's really powerful and really rare. One of the things that I talked about early on was in this interplay in the global justice movement, right? We had summit actions, and there was some criticism of the summit actions, but I think actually they fed a ton of energy back into the local organizing. So it was important that those things existed, that we had moments where we were thinking about national flashpoints. We were thinking about how do we use the press. We were thinking about how do we keep this part of a national conversation. At the same time, we were talking about how do we bring this home and keep this going, on a day in, day out, week in, week out language. And that's a dynamic that goes back a long ways. You can look at this in the civil rights movement, right? There's a history called I've Got the Light of Freedom by a historian named Charles Payne. And Payne talks about two different organizing traditions. One is a community organizing tradition that sort of was embodied by Ella Baker, that was embodied by SNCC, that was the long-term, day in, day out community organizing. But there was another tradition too, which was the SCLC tradition, and that was Birmingham, that was Selma, that was some of these big actions that create some of the defining images and defining moments of that movement that created a spark that made this a national discussion, and it sent people flocking into those community organizations. It's what motivated people to be a part of that and to make sacrifices and commitments to keeping that going on a long scale. So I guess that's what I'd like to leave, or if we see an ongoing conversation, I'd love to see us talk more not only about how we build our community, but how we do it in such a way that it can build to mass action and build to some of these flashpoint moments. That really is what's getting this attention. It's what's bringing in new people and new energy and making it more than just the type of community building that we do for a long time, but that make this a really special moment.
Before we have announcements, I just want to thank Mark and Cindy and all of you